So we're recording now. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure that Dr. Mohammed Hashas is joining us today from the Department of Political Science, Lewis University of Rome, Italy. Am I saying the name right, Dr. Mohammed?
Yes, it is. Perfect.
Dr. Mohammed's expertise include contemporary Arab Islamic intellectual history, contemporary Arab Islamic political theology and philosophy, religion, ethics and politics in the Arab world, Islamic thought in Western Europe, and contemporary Moroccan thought. Dr. Mohammed, my guest for today, speaks Arabic, English, French, and Italian. MashaAllah, as we say in Arabic. He recently edited Pluralism in Islamic Contexts, Ethics, Politics, and Modern Challenges. The book we're reading for a discussion today for our Global Islam Current Debates talk series from Nebraska University. Dr. Mohammed Hashas edited and authored many publications, including Islamic Ethics and the Trusteeship Paradigm, Abdurrahman's Philosophy in Comparative Perspectives, The Idea of European Islam, Religion, Ethics, Politics, and Perpetual Modernity, Imams in Western Europe, Developments, Transformations, and Institutional Challenges, Islam, State, and Modernity, Muhammad Abd and the Future of the Arab World, Contemporary Moroccan Thought. Today's reading about pluralism in Islamic context, ethics, politics, and modern challenges brings together international scholars of Islamic philosophy, theology, and politics to examine these current major questions. What is the place of pluralism in the Islamic founding texts? How have sacred and prophetic texts been interpreted throughout major Islamic intellectual history by the Sunni and the Shia? How does contemporary Islamic thought treat religious and political diversity in modern nation states and in societies in transition? How is pluralism dealt with in modern, major, and minor Islamic contexts? How does modern political Islam deal with pluralism in the public sphere? And what are the major internal and external challenges to pluralism in Islamic context? To you, Dr. Mohammed, on the big question on pluralism in Islam.
Thank you very much, Professor Abla Hasan, and allow me to use your first name afterwards. I am very pleased to be with you and with your students and maybe colleagues as well. I'm speaking to you from Rome. Hopefully there will be occasions for face-to-face contact and exchange in the not far future. I'm also pleased to introduce or to talk about the recently edited volume, which has been in progress for a few years, but seeing our exchange that the students level, etc., I will not go into in-depth of the content of the book. So I will do first and mostly a historical overview of the idea of pluralism within the Islamic tradition. And based on that, I leave some points for a discussion afterwards. So I will not say everything that is written in the book. I will be putting some material from outside the book as well, right? If you allow me, I will share some slides, right? You can see that, yeah? This question of pluralism is in religious studies in general is not very old. it started especially within the Christian theology and the Christian experience and the internal debates in the 50s, especially after the Second World War in the 50s and 60s, during the preparations for the Vatican Council II and its important resolutions and its ultimate opening up to other religions like Islam. Islam has always been considered like a heresy in the Roman Catholicism, but within the Vatican Council too, it started to be recognized as world religion, divine religion that also claims the path to truth and teaches morality, etc. So that's in general the sources of the concept in modern religious studies. But this doesn't mean that it has been absent in Arab or Islamic studies in general before that and after that. Because of its complexity, I will go on in these half an hour I have by posing some questions and giving some basic and broad answers. And based on that, we can have a good discussion afterwards. The slides, I hope, are clear enough. I don't need to put the big screen. What is Islam? When we speak about religion, Islam and pluralism, how do we define Islam? Or what do we mean by Islam? Or what do we mean by Islamic? What do we mean by the Islamists? These are terms that come often in the debate, right? And it's important to keep record of that. Or in other words, who speaks for Islam? Who defines these terms? Methodologically, this is very important before we could reach any debate about pluralism within the tradition. Who defines Islam? Are they the ordinary believers? Are they the ultra-Orthodox believers, very strict observers? Ordinary by mean laymen. They are also observers, but at the same time, they are not very, very dogmatic about their observance. Or so-called liberal or light believers? Are they these mystic Sufis? Or this definition of Islam is based mostly on what the jurists say, or what theologians say, what philosophers say, or what thinkers and writers from the Islamic culture background say. And of course, I put them here in one question form, but the jurists often don't say the same thing as the theologians, nor do theologians say the same thing as what the philosophers or public intellectuals or ordinary writers say. Or who the definers of this Islam? Are they the organized classical religious institutions like Al-Azhar in Egypt, or Al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco, or the religious establishment in Damascus, or in Jordan, or in Indonesia, or in Saudi Arabia? Or these definitions we get of Islam, are they ones that are given by Islamic movements that are born often in some country, but some of them become international or transnational? I do not only want to refer to Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, but also to Jamaat Islami of Pakistan, or Deobandi movement of India, or Nahda movement of Tunisia, or Al-'Adl wal-Ihsan in Morocco, and so on. And the Turkish various movements, etc. Or the definitions we use of Islam are the ones that political Islamic parties say or use. And here there is, again, a distinction we have to draw between Islamic movements and Islamic political parties. Which Islamic parties? The ones that are local, or the ones that are transnational or regional and have influence beyond their borders of where they were born? Or is it the Islam of terrorists, which is often the one that makes much more noise in the media and TV and the internet, right? Or is it the Islam of non-Muslim experts of Islam? And that's also important, especially in Western media. There are a lot of experts of Islam, and they also give certain definitions. or the experts or scholars, I mean, or they are the Islamophobes, and these have also their own definition of what Islam is and what Muslim is. Or is it states, particular modern nation states, and their institutions like the Moroccans, the Algerian or Saudi Arabian, etc., which are states that did not exist, not all of them, did not often exist in pre-modern times, but a lot of them were created in modern times. So they have nationalized religious institutions, and these religious institutions became mostly speak in the name of the land or of the country where they are, first of all. So these are some basic questions that we have to keep in mind when we are defining what is Islam and what is Islamic, or what is Islamist. And well, as to religious pluralism, again, I would like that we bear in mind at least the three major concepts, but historically, very simplistically, we bear in mind two major eras. The pre-modern era or diversity and the way it has dealt with diversity, and the modern, so-called modern era. Of course, when does modernity start? That's another debate. But let's say with consolidated democracy, and that has modernity is not only enlightenment, but not only before that Renaissance, not only the religious wars in between, but at the same time, most often maybe we can refer to the post-World War, when democracy in the West itself has taken a more the shape we know of it today, where international women's suffrage, women could started to vote, and equality issues became more consolidated. But before that, Western democracy had also its ailments or its shortcomings. Women were out of it, for example, were not allowed to vote in most Western countries before the Second World War. So in pre-modern times, we refer mostly to before the French and the American revolutions, which have given human rights a political dimension, and in which new class of human beings started to take place and defend their rights, and the rights became more a right for all equally. Everyone has to be treated equally before the law, and the idea of the birth of the Constitution and the rest that you know until now. But in general, that's modern time. Pre-modern times is when there was no idea of Constitution, and the idea of human rights was not as we know it today. There were rights, but they were, a lot of them were in the hands of kings or sultans or emperors, etc. In East and in the West, in the Arab world, in the Islamic broad world, or anywhere in the world, rights were often depended on the enlightenment that the ruler enjoys and his entourage. Broadly, we can, in pre-modern times, we could distinguish between two major trends: the exclusivist trend of particular religion or doctrine, and the inclusivist one. The exclusivist trend is that a particular religion does not recognize other religions. Salvation is only within that religion. If you are Christian, only a Christian, and especially if you are Roman Catholic Christian, only Roman Catholics enjoy salvation. Or other Catholics, Protestants, or later on Lutherans, etc., they don't. They are outside this Christian salvation, or the idea of salvation. And this is intra-religious exclusion, and it's even worse for inter-religions relations. Because Christianity, for example, did not recognize other religions, and did not recognize also internal divisions. But in the case, I'm giving examples so that we clarify things, because these Islam and Christianity as world religions, and they have influence on human ideas, and they are examples we are taking here. As to inclusivism, it means that a particular tradition or religion recognizes diversity within it and also recognizes diversity outside it. It means that it gives rights to most or certain religious minorities. And that's the case of, for example, of Islam. Islam, in the book, in the Quran, which is its sacred book, its major source of thinking and governing, and it recognizes clearly the rights of Jews and Christians to have their own faith, to keep it and to practice it. And this was promulgated, defended by the Prophet and his earlier caliphs and all the caliphs afterwards. Of course, in broad 1500 years of Islamic history, certain moments in history were darker if the caliph or certain areas were not governed by a tyrant, or the Christians might have suffered. But overall, it is a right that these minorities have. And this was extended to the Zoroastrians when the first early Muslim empire expanded in Persia. And then the same thing was done for the Hindus, because when the Mughals, the Muslim Mughals ruled in India, the majority of society was Hindu. So the idea of minority rights was extended to them, in the sense that they could be governed, they could be part of the community or the ummah, and they could pay extra tax, but at the same time they are recognized. It's in modern times, it's like second-class citizenship, but at the time it wasn't advanced. There was nothing better than that. I mean, there was a clear recognition that particular communities have to be respected. While in other religious, there is no other religious tradition or religious text that mentions and gives the right to other religious minorities, and the Quran does that. As to modern diversity, there is a new concept that comes in, and I'm using this concept from John Hick, that's a Christian theologian, famous one. So in modern times, the same thing applies. There are still traditions that are exclusive; they don't recognize other traditions. But now because of the challenge of pluralism and the opening, globalization, etc., often traditions try not to be as outspoken about it as they could have been or they were in pre-modern times. So now they navigate between the idea of inclusivism, how to be inclusive of others, because the nation state, the modern nation state, by obligation, tries to treat everyone equally. That's the basic principle of what modern nation state and constitutionalism is about. That everyone is equal before the law, irrespective of their gender or of their religion or of their ethnicity, etc. So in that sense, all religious traditions have become inclusive. And the idea of pluralism among religious scholars, it tries to go beyond legal perspectives and try to find like a unifying element among all religions. So the theologians that defend the idea of pluralism try to say that all religions, especially big major religions in the world, they actually defend the same idea of God. They call it, they have different names for it, they have different details and rituals about it, but at the end, it is one God. If there is a God, it should be one, right? So that's what the idea of pluralism is about, which means that by definition, once each religious tradition enters into this paradigm of thinking about all religions, it means that each tradition should recognize the other tradition as also partly a true tradition. The Christians should say that Muslims are right or can be right. It is their way of being right. of seeking truth and seeking salvation. And the Muslims should say the same thing about Christians, should say the same thing about Jews, and Jews should say the same thing about Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and any other philosophical tradition that is not classic also. I mean, like Scientology could be, some scholars put it also into this category, though it's not a world religion, but it's modern phenomenon. I hope I have made the point clear here. Then we can always stop, or we can leave that to the discussion. I move on. I have already hinted to a lot of what I say later on, but it has been important to put the slides here this way to be as expressive as possible. Well, so what are the major sources in the Islamic tradition that defend this idea of pluralism or internal inclusivism first, in classical terms? Well, there are clear, I will not cite them here to save some time, but since you do Islamic and Arabic studies, you should be familiar with minimum of these. There are clear Quranic verses in the Quran that say that everyone is free to believe or not to believe in God, and that everyone will be judged individually. So in that sense, to use a term of contemporary, who died actually 10 years ago, Algerian French theologian scholar of religion, that Mohammed Hashas, he says that Islam is actually Protestant religion in this regard. Is spiritually Protestant in the sense of that there is no mediation between man and God, and that's what Protestantism is about, right? And the piety is intimate. There is no need for community to teach, to instill the idea of piety or taqwa in the individual. Of course, the community is important because there is always need for the other to learn, to exchange, to put certain values in test, like sacrifice, fraternity, solidarity, etc. Then there is the prophetic period, which is the prophet, of course, try to apply what the Quran says, and that's the first. So his teachings, the prophetic teachings, are Quranic teachings. And then there is the political element in it, which is the Charter of Medina, which tries to put the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians together as a political community. So the Ummah, in that sense, is not only about Muslims. The Ummah is like the equivalent to the state in that sense. It's a community of believers of different faiths under the same umbrella. The guided caliphs, especially the guided caliphs, for in the Sunni tradition, and also later caliphs, they followed the path, though at certain moments, as I said, it was not always followed the same prophetic or Quranic teachings. There were historical moments of conflict, of tension, either intra Muslim communities or against non-Muslims for different socio-political reasons. Well, in this period, the idea of the dimitude developed further, and I think the students are familiar, or people here are familiar with the idea of dimitude. I mean, it's the protection of the minorities, especially people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, but it was extended to other major important minorities in other Islamic territories. And then we have historical evidence of this inclusivism. This historical evidence is that people of especially elitists, intellectuals and scientists and political leaders or religious representatives were respected and worked closely with either emirs or sultans or until modern times in the palace with certain kings or emirs, irrespective of their religion, which is something that you hardly find in other traditions. You hardly find other traditions that are, let's say, in medieval Europe, that the Christian king of England has a Muslim or Muslim court advisor or consultant. While in the Islamic empires, including the last one in the broad Middle East, like the Ottoman Empire, you had Jewish, for example, and Christian or Greek Orthodox scholars or consultants to the king. And you find that in the Arab world, until recently, even before the creation of Israel, or also in the 50s, there were Jewish or Christian ministers in Iraq or in Egypt or in Syria, and until now in Syria and Lebanon. So there was this minority right lived and was experienced. And in Morocco, until now, there is a Jewish consultant to the king. So this is historical evidences of this pluralism within. Where does it come from? Then we can think of this, and this you can apply this scheme to all world religions. What does world religion do? It is not addressed only to the individual. It's not only addressed to society, to the community of believers. It is addressed to both and in connection with their presence in the universe. It tries to give them sense in their being in the world. And that pluralism we were referring to is the recognition of this scheme of thinking within that particular tradition. So the cosmology of the Quran is that it tries to give the individual a place in human existence, not only within Muslims' existence or within American existence or European, but in broad human existence, the place of the individual in the world, in relation with nature throughout history. So that's what faith tries to instill in the individual. Then this happens through, it happens in society. It doesn't happen in the abstract. And in society, society is always full of dynamics. Not all Muslims agree on the same thing. Not all Christians agree on the same thing. So there is always competition, rivalry, power incentives, power motives, etc. And in that challenge of social competition or dynamics, the individual has to come out has to distinguish himself or herself and try to situate himself as much as possible within society and in history according to the cosmology of the tradition he belongs to. So that's what faith, the reflective faith, is about. It's not only about mimicking what his society does. If you are born in Tunisia, you become Tunisian, you do what Tunisians do, and that's it. And then you say you are a Muslim and you are happy with it. Or if you are born in America, then you do what Americans do. You live the American way of life, and you think that's it. World religion tries to be comprehensive and to challenge the individual to take into account that. And when such a world religion does that for its own believers and at the same time recognizes other faiths, it means it's humanist in its outlook. The fact that particular tradition recognizes another faith, it means that it recognizes these human aspects and dynamics and egoism and incentives and effort that each individual does in society to survive as an individual within community, within larger society, which might be multiple, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. So that's the power of a religious paradigm when it comes to thinking about other faiths, when it recognizes them and does not stop only at its own believers. And this happens in time, in space, and according to particular mind space, discipline or mindscape, to use a particular term. So Muslims are not the same throughout history. They change. So that's time element. And they should change according to time. That's why religion or Islam says it's valid for all times. It's also valid for all space, for all geographies. Of course, the Moroccans and the Indonesians, they share many things, but at the same time, they don't share many things for these reasons. And how do human beings try to navigate this time and space element? They do that through human reason. So there is always an extra element, though they believe that the Quran is their guideline, or their prophetic teachings are their guideline, or classical religious scholars is their guideline, but they still have to use their mind to bring back always that element, that idea, and try to live it, either maximally or minimally. So some of them try to adhere to it literally, some mildly, some revolutionarily, etc. So it's dialectical process. It's a process. So this is it. I mean, I have put here other terms, but we can escape them. Ontology and epistemology. Epistemology is how human beings, the study of knowledge, how cognitive norms are created, and this here is about cosmology, particular values. Well, I leave that here. I've written on that something, and if it interests some of you, we can send you some material. But overall, it's the process that I'm interested in conveying here. The ontological moment is the creation, the way the creation moment is investigated in the Quran, and your professor has is publishing a great book on that, and how that ontological moment is interpreted according to time and space, and that's what epistemology is about. Well, overall, in classical Islamic tradition, I think I because of time. I will be very brief. I will not explain. A particular scholar has this scheme, George Horani, about how Muslims have thought of reason and revelation, how they navigate between the Quran or revelation in general and human experience. So some, for example, think that revelation is only supported by independent reason. So revelation is the major source of their worldview. Some say no, revelation is supported by dependent reason and not independent reason, which means that the reason here is helpful, but is weaker than revelation in that sense, in simplistic terms. Some are the rigid, they say only revelation counts. Whatever revelation says, we do it. Whatever the prophetic example says, we do it. Even if it's 15 centuries back, we do it the way it was said. But of course, because the human societies change and there are a lot of things that the tradition cannot say. Think about technology and digital world. Who might have thought of that 1500 years ago? So it is for religious scholars to help the ordinary believers to come out with solutions and to survive and live according to the tradition still. Or in the Shia tradition, revelation is extended by the imams. So the imam plays the role of absent, like the imam belongs to the prophetic family, so he does the role of he guides the community till the return of the 12th imam. So I leave this without much ado. And then the philosopher's perspective, that's a minority tendency which is growing in modern times. Reason is superior to revelation. Philosophers in the classical tradition gave priority to reason, in the sense of they still remained faithful to the Quran, to the tradition, remained Muslim, but they also defended the idea that human reason alone can reach, can understand why certain values are good and why certain values are bad, without need to go back to the tradition, to the revelation. So in that sense, revelation is like secondary. It remains important, but it is kind of secondary. Human reason is itself a divine given, divine given, and it guides human beings. So human beings can know what is good and bad alone through human reason. What these elements of diversity within the tradition have manifest themselves in certain consequences. I have thought of these major ones. First, about the Quran. There are multiple linguistic, juridical, and mystical interpretations of the Quran. So this is internal pluralism. There are multiple legal theories, madhahib, etc. They all have the Quran as the platform, or le plafond as the top fountain of inspiration and guidance, but the details for human affairs, divorce, marriage, business, etc. It's particular legal theories, each one according to time and space. And then multiple caliphal or imperial or modern state policies. They reflect this diversity. So not all caliphs or empires of the Islamic tradition or modern nation state interpret Sharia in general, or Quran or Islam in this broad sense, the same way. Each one has chosen in certain details. They all remain Muslim, but in certain details, they take different approaches to it. More clearly, and this one you should know, but when we put it in clear terms, maybe it makes even more sense. The Quran in that sense is not a juridical text. Its juridical aspect is no more than 20%. It's mostly about ethics, moral teachings, moral stories, other prophets, Day of Judgment, etc. Which means that Muslims, when they read the Quran, they don't read it to find legal answers, but they read it as a book of piety, as a book of intimacy with the divine. Or if they are ordinary Muslims, believers. But if they are scholars or thinkers, theologians, they read it, or philosophers, they read it for intellectual inspiration. So the Quran is a text, but is not a juridical text as such. Second, there is no one book of Sharia. Sharia is not only law, it is mostly ethics, morality, and mystical dimensions of Islam. Sharia is now often defined as the path towards God. So in the media in the West, there is now the idea of, also in the Arab world, it has become like, because of this influence, everyone who says Sharia means Sharia law or hudud or sanctions, though they have been hardly applied even in classical times, let alone in modern times, but everyone refers to it in that deformative form. There is no book of Sharia. If you want to say, Muslims would like to apply Sharia, which Sharia you refer to? There is no one book of that. So it depends on where you are and what interpretation you have in mind. That's why I said also time, space, and mindscape or line discipline are important here. And then Muslims, they no longer have, or they even in the past, they didn't have one caliph for all Muslims, apart from the prophetic, and then the first 4 caliphs. Even with the Umayyad or the Abbasids, there were always dynasties or geographies that were outside this main caliphal sovereignty. And now, in modern times, even more, there is no one pope or no one caliph. So Muslims don't have pope. When there is a debate about reforming Islam, you cannot reform something that has no one voice, one authority. The Catholic Church could reform, but Islam, in that sense, does not reform. It reforms already in local texts. The Moroccans are reforming, the Algerians are reforming, the Egyptians are reforming. So each one is taking their own ways of reforming, but there is no one council for Muslims to say, oh, today we let's agree on this and we reform. And this aspect of diversity of Sharia was very positive in pre-modern times because it allowed for human beings to be plural, to have different interpretations on legal issues. But modern times, the nation state wants one law, one land. It doesn't want to have two juridical laws, for example, in one land. Though modern state also has its own mechanism of multiple interpretations of constitution and law. Well, these are simplistic maps to say that a world view that moves from particular geography to become this big cannot stay the same. It's plural by definition. Without pluralism, internal pluralism within, it could not have reached other places. The same thing about Catholicism, because each geography, country, nation, community adopts from a particular religion what is most suitable to it in local terms. These are things that I have said, but in simplistic terms, I can say also this. You can say Islam is many things. You have to take into account the Quran, the Sunnah, the fiqh, and also the fiqh, theology, philosophy, Sufism, social sciences now, the exact sciences as well. So that's what a comprehensive religion does. Tries to does not exclude itself from permeating other human affairs and human social so disciplines, I mean, and thinking. That's why when we talk about Islam, we always have to be careful. Do we mean popular Islam and its diversity, intellectual Islam and its diversity, mystic Islam and its internal diversity, political Islam and its diversity, or state Islam and its diversity? Because state Islam, I mean, there are some around 60 so-called Islamic countries or countries that have Islam as the religion of the majority. And that has to be taken into account, or other Islam or Orientalist Islam. It's an Islam that non-Muslims have. It's either the scholastic, what the scholars, I'm not using Orientalist here in negative sense, but there is a side of it. Especially now if you take into account the populists in the West and the Islamophobes. They have their own view of what Islam is about. So that's another Islam. It's not the Islam of the Muslims, but their own view. Of course, it's based on what terrorists that claim to be Muslims say, etc. ISIS or Daesh or also Taliban before, and now the situation is complicated. So, but anyway, that's another. All these are factors that contribute to making that form of other Islam. This doesn't mean that this diversity within the tradition makes society perfect, because there are serious problems in most Islamic majority societies, right? And this diversity is not solved because there is still a labor, a kind of work at home being done. It's still not complete. It's how to understand modernity, how to interpret tradition in modern times, in which are ruled by secular worldview, in which religion has to remain in the public sphere, no longer a ruler, as the church was in the West. So I have put here some basic and main sources of contention and confusion in modern times. For example, for many ordinary Muslims and for a lot of radical political Islamists, they still confuse the Quran with the modern constitution. They say, we have the Quran, we don't need a modern constitution. That's not a small problem, that's a basic problem. All the modern nation state is based on modern constitution. So if you say the Quran can play the role of the constitution, then you will have other problems. Would you apply the dimitude status for non-Muslims? But no, dhimmitude has kind of stopped, vanished at least 150 years ago. Then there is confusion between the concept of the caliphate or the emirate and the modern nation state. That's why Daesh, ISIS, returned, claiming that they are creating the glorious caliphate. But the caliphate of the classical times has nothing to do with the caliphate of ISIS. And we can go into details later on. Then another confusion: Sharia and legal prescriptions or versus modern positive law. Well, Muslims want to keep some or a lot of Sharia regulations, but a lot of other Muslims want to change them. They say that Sharia classical legal prescriptions are for the past. They were good, they were advanced. Now we have something else better. We adjust. But some still want to keep the idea of Sharia as always having answers. Then the question of religion in the public sphere versus religion in public institutions. There is difference. It may seem small, but it is a big difference. And then the community rights and minority rights. Community rights of pre-modern times and minority rights of modern times. They share a lot, but at the same time, the Jews in the United States, they have rights. The Christians or the Muslims in Europe, in Western Europe, they have rights. But often these minority rights, they are within the paradigm of modern nation state and within the constitution, and not based on a religious ethos, not because the Catholic Church is giving them that right, because the Catholic Church is no longer in power. It's a legitimate, historically in Western Europe, is still important, but it's the secular state that now governs all. And then there is classical empowerment, women rights versus modern equality rights. Of course, Sharia gave unprecedented rights to women in classical terms. But modern times, there is a question of equality, which is a step further. Equality not only at the ontological level, that everyone is equal before the law, before God, but equality at the legal level, on the legal level. And that's an issue that Muslim feminists or Islamic feminists are dealing with. They have written a lot about, and it's a debate. Then there is an issue with classical individual moral responsibility and individual more modern legal rights. You know, in the individual who was always central in classic religious terms. Because without individual, tradition doesn't, faith is based on the individual. But in modern times, it's the individual is central, but it's not his morality, it's his legal rights that are centralized. And there is confusion between these among religious, if we are discussing the issue from a religious perspective. The nation state, the modern nation state, does not care whether you are good Muslim or good Christian. The modern nation state cares if you are a good citizen. If you pay taxes, you abide by the law, you treat everyone equally, you are good at work, and etc. But in classical terms, it was the morality of the individual that was fundamental. Of course, that's why some scholars say that classical world is better, because the morality of the individual is much better than only the legal aspect of the individual. I think I have. I should stop. No, there is two major slides, and then stop. Muslims have been discussing these issues for the last nearly 200 years, and it's still not resolved because change of mentalities takes time, right? And there are certain things that Muslims don't want to change, though they debate them. They don't. Certain things they cling to them because they consider them fundamental. Well, if you think of the classical period, if we put it in simplistic terms, before 1800s, There is a period of so-called Nahda or Renaissance. There is another phase of this Renaissance from the 60s until 2000s. And after the Arab Spring, I think there is something else evolving, because political Islam has also showed a lot of shortcomings. So I think a new paradigm of thinking, especially in the Arab world, will emerge because of the failures of so-called political Islam in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Morocco, in other parts, in Sudan, in Algeria before. Then, three major concluding notes. All these issues are political issues. So the pluralism, the issue of pluralism is fundamentally a political issue. It's not about whether Islam is compatible with, for example, exact sciences, modern achievements in whatever science. No, there is no such issue. There was no such issue in the past. So the issue is mostly political, how to govern, how to lead society. Then the issue of pluralism aims at the end at recognition of diversity. And this recognition is not easy, you know. Belief systems find it hard to recognize that another believer from another religion is equal and has the same value or moral value. So pluralism is to teach believers and non-believers that a good Muslim can be as equal, as good as a good Christian, or as a good Jew, or as a good Buddhist, or as a good atheist also. So that's the idea of religious pluralism in modern times. It's not only about legal aspect, but it tries to bring a moral aspect into it. Then at the end, I think a point for further reflection, Islam within this scheme appears or is theocentric, but not theocratic. It tries, its paradigm is to make the individual always accountable and always invoke the divine in his or her daily life and daily acts and whatever act and whatever thought. So in that sense, it is conscientious exercise, if you want to say. And in that sense, it is theocentric. It makes the theos, or theology, or the God, or the idea of the divine, the center of being, which is different from being theocratic. Theocratic is wishes that these thoughts or this paradigm is also lived politically, by force, maybe. And I think that's, and there is difference here, and that's the debate. I think I should stop there, and thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. I can't thank you enough for your valuable elaboration on such a huge, problematic, and commonly misunderstood question, the question on pluralism in Islam. I know we have a lot of questions. I personally would like to discuss so many of your important points. Before we disconnect though the recording, I know you're so active, mashallah again, in research. Any updates from you on future projects, or maybe what your teaching schedule is like, what you're teaching now, what you're doing now? A quick update to followers and fans of Dr. Mohammed Hashas.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm currently finishing this comprehensive new collective book on contemporary Moroccan thought. There is no such work on Maghreb intellectual history, on modern and contemporary intellectual history. So this is the book that is taking my time now. As to teaching, I'm teaching Islam in Europe now in my home university, Louis in Rome. And most probably I will also be teaching the same or similar course at the American John Cabot University in Rome. So that's my main teaching. I've also previously last semester taught political thought and communication in the Arab world, and the students enjoyed it very much. Yeah.
Good luck, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you so much for joining us, for your continuous support. Personally, you've been so supportive of my research, and for supporting Nebraska University Global Islam Current Debates. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.